Hey, you're listening to Blindsight. Let's go. Mental health isn't something to take lightly. It's time to fight. It's time to thrive. Let's do this.
Hello there. This is Bill Lundgren, your host of Blindsight. Welcome to another episode. Delighted to have you listening in, and hope that if you have some ideas, which I'm sure you do, and some comments to make or whatever, don't forget we have two ways that you can get in touch with us. One is feedback at aftersight.org, or the feedback line, which is 720-712-8856. I'd love to hear from you. Today, we're going to be talking about a topic that some people tend to shy away from, but, we tend to go for the toughies. And we're going to talk about depression today. And depression, as it can occur in anyone, but particularly people with blindness, and how we can deal with it, and also how we can get other people to back off and allow us to feel like we have some control. So, of course, I've got my esteemed colleague and producer, Jonathan Price, who's going to help me with this topic. And, we'll see where it goes. How are you, Jonathan?
Hey, Bill. Yep. Doing good. Just getting ready for the Shine Festival that's happening tomorrow. The kids are finally back in school, and I don't know what to do with a quiet house anymore. It's felt like it's been, years, and no, it's good. The kids they're in an amazing school, which is a classical like academy, and they go back to really kind of how they were learning back in Greece and Latin and all that kind of stuff. So it's a very interesting concept of education.
Sounds like they're enjoying. Do they wear togas? Do they wear togas?
No, but they do have pretty strict uniforms.
Okay.
Yeah. So, although the togas would be rather interesting.
Yeah, I can imagine.
With the gold leaf headband and stuff. Oh yeah, for sure. Well, I'm really looking forward to this discussion.
Well, I was thinking today about the fact that this is the start of my third year with Aftersight, and and also looking back in my history, it was September when I got the word that I was going to lose my sight, and I sort of had a clue something was wrong, but to get the word I'm going to eventually be blind was sort of like a shock for me. Okay. And while it didn't happen for quite a while, I would have expected myself to go into depression.
Oh, yeah.
Because it would feel like there's nothing I can do, and, which is often the origin of the depressed feelings. I realized a couple things. Number one, I did not like Number one, I knew that I had to be self-reliant. I had to, whatever happened would come from me rather than from, some miracle outside of me. And number two, I hated the work I was doing at the time. I was in marketing and marketing writer and all this kind of, which has a lot of visual stuff to it. And I said, I can't do that. And that was enough to kick me in the butt. Getting the diagnosis kicked me in the butt immediately. He says, look, you don't like what you're doing, so you obviously aren't going to stay there. Can't stay there. And I had been for years working as a volunteer in the field of addiction treatment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I was, I was doing marketing for some programs, and I was a representative for what we call the Junior Chamber of Commerce in those days, or the JC. And nobody else wanted to take on working with treatment programs. And I said, sure. And I loved it. And it dawned on my feeble mind, maybe I could get paid for it. And And I did end up, it took a while, but I ended up as the director of a drug and alcohol abuse prevention agency.
There you go.
Pulled it up from being set closed to becoming a very valuable commodity in the county where it was located. And but it wasn't quite what I wanted. And I did tell everybody I was going to lose my sight as sometime, but they were willing to work with me.
Yeah.
I also gave up driving. So because it was a county-wide program, I always had to find a board member, somebody to drive me. But the thing was, it worked well. And then I left that after having gotten counseling training, because there was something about counseling that just felt like it was better for me than administration. And so eventually I opened up my own practice, and I've been doing it for these many years. Now, the point of that story is to say that think about Martin Seligman's theory of what we call learned helplessness. Isn't that a wonderful term? As the component of depression. And I might add that Sigmund Freud described depression as anger turned inward. And when you have this, what Seligman found out, this idea of learned helplessness and depression, was through dog experiments where dogs were given shock and they couldn't do anything about it. And they finally just took on a very apathetic mode because they knew they couldn't do it. They had to suffer. And so consequently, he applied that to humans. And then he applied it in terms of stressful situations where people learn that they can't do anything about it and then give up and don't try. Well, in my thinking now, it's that there's a certain element of that for people who have become or are blind, and may lead them to give up. Say, I can't do anything about it, and in just in too many instances, may get try to resolve it by drinking or drugs. And I wondered, why didn't that happen to me? And then I realized that I was born hearing impaired, severely hearing impaired. And I learned in growing up, my mother did not coddle me.
Yeah.
She said, you can hear, you just need to try harder.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a little toughy. But at the same time, it showed me I can do something. I learned lip reading. And I would sit in the front of the class.
Oh, boy.
I went to a regular school. I could read the teacher's lips and get the gist of what he or she was teaching. And it was, in other words, I found a way to show that I was not helpless. And I think that's one of the crucial things. And certainly Seligman says in cases of depression, this is one of the first things we have to look at. What does the person believe that he or she has some ability to change situation? And oftentimes therapy and medication is the way that we get people to change that trajectory that they're on and learn, I can do something. But at the same time, I also invite people to take a look at how those around us may, in fact, reinforce the idea that we're helpless. And I'm kind of reminded of this because, again, over this past weekend, a friend of mine, for the first time, stayed over with me. He was in town for some business. And, I really was in charge of making decisions where we ate, where we, some things that we did. I was in charge. I was not helpless. And that was a good feeling, the reminder that I'm not helpless as a person with blindness and hearing
Yeah.
deficit, and that I have the autonomy to be able to do whatever I want. I live alone, so I'm forced in a position of doing. But I know there are some people in my life who have trouble because they're trying to be protective of me. They're afraid I'm going to hurt myself, and
Yeah.
so they keep intervening. And I get real PO'd at them. I'm trying to teach them, and some people are very hard-headed. They don't understand that I need to have that autonomy. And I think of so many people who uh, who are blind, or older people who are
Yeah.
learning. It's gradual blindness because of macular degeneration. They don't have the experience of knowing, oh, even if I'm blind, I can do X, Y, Z. And they have family members who try to do everything for them, and they don't get the opportunity to know, oh, I can do this. And sometimes,
Yep.
uh, like in the beginning, when I was refusing, except for a few people, to say that I'm losing my eyesight, and I'd go out in the street and I'd trip over a fire hydrant or run into a little old lady who crosses in front of me and I don't see her. And, that's, a terrible way to go
Right.
through. But at the same time, I had to learn how to be careful as a blind person, but not helpless. And I think that is the important lesson that comes out of all of this, is for us to, when we caretakers, what we call caretakers, are people who get their goodies from taking care of other people. Sometimes they don't take care of themselves, but because they get their evaluation of themselves by taking care of people, and sometimes they get in the way because they won't allow the person, that won't realize that one way to take care of somebody is to let them try. And you don't want them, you don't want them, for example, I joked about the hiking trip that you all
Right.
set up. And I thought, well, one of the things we're going to do is going to have these cliffs that we're going to walk along, and we see if the blind people have no problem negotiating that. And of course, we wouldn't do that. But at the same time, it is important for, if there are any family members or
Yeah.
friends of people with blindness
Right.
listening, talk it over with the person and try to stifle yourself, as Archie Bunker used to say, stifle yourself and allow the person to try. And it was interesting. I was on a hike in Mount Falcon a couple of days after the hike we were on.
Yeah.
And my friend that I was hiking with said, he gave very few instructions. And he told me that my last dog, before Aiden, had scowled at him when he was starting to give us a lot of instruction. So he said, I learned I have to back off. And I will say that Aiden did beautifully. Yeah, he was what I needed. I had a great time hiking the time because people weren't, there wasn't a lot of interference going on. It was just Aiden and I finding out what we could do, what we could still do after kind of an absence from mountain hiking for a while. And you see, this is when we have a sense that we have some autonomy and control. And you can have that as a person with blindness. I learned that. If there's nothing else that I've learned over the years, I do have a lot more ability and autonomy to be able to do what I want to do without having somebody hover over me. And that's but I think that it takes a lot of courage in family members to back off.
Oh, yeah.
It takes a lot of courage for us to try things that we might be hesitant to do, but the payoff is tremendous. And that's the kind. And you see, people who are prone to depression, I want to be real clear. The depression is not caused by the blindness. People who are prone to depression or anxiety may find those symptoms magnified by the strange terrain that we're in as a person with blindness, particularly someone who's newly blind, because we're so used to the visual cues and responding to the visual cues, and and to not have those anymore. Now I know, after all these years of being totally blind, that I don't think I want to go through the trouble of having my sight restored if that would happen, because my brain couldn't handle the stimulus coming in.
Yeah.
And I'm just sort of used to it. I do get some stimulus with RP because there are always things floating in front of my eyes. And sometimes I see, and I've been trying to figure out why, whether it's a particular mood or whatever. I can even see a whole group of people off in the distance with multicolored shirts on.
Right.
And so my eyes are still working. They just, because the rods and cones have been destroyed, none of this is useful. But it's almost, it's so familiar to me that it's almost comforting. Oh, yeah, I'm seeing all these blotches go by, and I don't pay any mind. And then I have to use my ears, my touch, all the other senses in order to negotiate. And guess what? We can do that, given the freedom to learn and to try and to find out if there are any limits that we have to pay attention to. And that does so much for our esteem when we realize, oh, I can do this. And I think one of the sad things in the rehabilitation community, they're so afraid of liability that you'll have workers in some of the traditional, particularly the one governmental rehab facilities, they won't allow a blind person to go anywhere without one of their staff with them. And this is where some of the NFB program is very different, in that people who go into that, they're on their own. I mean, there was one time I was told, it was early in the morning, the travel instructor said, and I didn't have a dog then, I just had the white cane, and I was to go down about a mile in the town and go to Abe's Diner and get some coffee. Well, unfortunately, Abe's was closed when I got there. So I got a little turned around, and fortunately I heard a woman come by, and I asked where I was, and she told me, and I was directed in the right direction. And then she said, would you like to play with me? I thought. And I thought, 8 o'clock in the morning, she's on the street. What does this mean? And she said it again. And I said, and of all the people she could have picked out, it was me. And then I found out, she said, would you pray with me?
Pray, yeah. And
what she was praying for me was for healing. And when we parted, I said to myself, healing from what?
Yeah.
I'm blind. Okay. So big deal.
Right.
And that is when I realized how much I've grown in coming to accept myself as a blind person, and that's not as big a deal as it had been at one time. But you see, that's a work that the families must participate in, friends participate in, and then the individual, you, the person who has blindness, has to be willing to take the risk, and they may need a program, a training center, it may need just a counseling. And the counselor here again, this is where it gets tricky, because you've got to find a counselor who's comfortable with working with separating the issue of blindness from depression or anxiety. And sometimes, like our families, counselors can fall into that same trap of not understanding or thinking, well, because you're blind, you're depressed. And you get into that same kind of thing in terms of drinking behavior. Now, I have to say, on the air, the statistics point to the idea that those with blindness are 3 times more likely to become alcoholics than the average population. And there's a lot of reasons for that. Now, some of the statistics may cover people who have lost their sight because of drinking, that is, an accident or whatever. But there's also the discrimination against being allowed to work. But there's also the people, particularly those who are unemployed, have nothing else to do and feel they can't do anything else. So they relieve their symptoms with drink or pills or whatever. And then it begins that whole cycle again. And what I ask people to do is to take a look at your lifestyle as a person with blindness and have a talk with your friends. And if you feel like you are willing to do this, take this risk of trying on your own or with people with you, but ask them to hold back on their attempt to protect you. And if your drinking is pretty regular, I would look at that and say, do I have a problem here? Can I do it myself? Or do I need like a counselor or a 12-step program or something?
Yeah.
And there's a lot of literature in AA, and believe it or not, so much of that literature is available for free through the Library of Congress, Talking Book Library, and you can get it. You can put it on your iPhone and listen to it anytime, or in your computer, or they'll send you a digital tape and provide a tape recorder. You can hear all of that stuff. You can. You don't have to say, "Oh, I can't participate in a program." You can. You go to a meeting. You have an audio with you. You go to, if you go into treatment, they need to provide you with the literature of ways to do it, and it can be done. You can't say, in my belief, and take it from somebody who's been blind for a long time, you can do it, even if you don't think so. And that's really what I'm concerned about. Any thoughts from you, Jonathan?
Yeah, I've really enjoyed listening to you talk about a lot of this stuff, and I keep coming back to this story that I've heard from the time I was a child, and many of our listeners will probably know it, but the idea of helplessness, that learned helplessness, is So the story goes that there's this village, and they capture this baby elephant, and they put a chain around its leg, and they hammer this post into the ground that's maybe only a few feet tall. It's not a huge post, but the post is strong enough that the baby elephant's not going to go anywhere. And so the more it struggles, it learns that it can't escape. And so it's learning this behavior that it can't do something, or that it's not supposed to do something. It's a negative connotation and a negative punishment for this behavior. Well, fast forward to when the elephant becomes an adult, all the keeper has to do is place that chain around the elephant's foot, and the grown elephant could very, very, very easily pull that stake out of the ground and just head off into the forest or the jungle. But it's learned that it's helpless when that leash or that chain is on its ankle. And so many times in our lives, we have been inundated with people, with social media messaging, with various things in our lives that tell us how we should be acting, how we should be behaving, how we need to do this, or we've had the quote unquote thumb put down on us, and we've been held in a certain place of almost contempt. And people have taken advantage. People will see you as weak, and they'll take advantage of that. They will lord over you very similarly to the way parents can lord over their kids and say, if you don't do what I tell you to do, then there's going to be giant consequences. There's a shame aspect to it. And children will learn that, oh, I shouldn't make mom and dad upset, so I need to do this. That's a learned helplessness. Don't make mom and dad mad, or something's bad's going to happen.
And with these learned what often happens in alcoholic homes. The children learn
absolutely
that kind of thing.
Well, and even to the alcoholic sees that they can't be in a good state of mind unless they are quote unquote helpless to the bottle. And they use that bottle as a way to increase their dopamine input, and so that they can feel something. So we learn these behaviors in a negative form, but our brain tricks us into thinking that it's a positive thing. And so we see these cages and we get really comfortable with them. It becomes the Stockholm syndrome, where we're in this place of captivity, but we don't know anything else. And so we're just happy living in this little place of captivity, only to realize, like you were talking about with your vision, if you got your sight back, how you could probably be more depressed, because it would be so much information you wouldn't know what to do with it. And when you apply that type of thinking to a whole world that is at your fingertips, that in itself is extremely overwhelming. And you take one small step at a time. You say, okay, like we had Spencer, he wasn't on the show, but he was up at the hike, and I've gotten to know him pretty well. But there were times where fear was kind of crippling in his life. And just to be able to start going to the end of the driveway to get the mail as somebody who just lost his vision can be absolutely terrifying. And even back that up, just stepping outside as somebody who's blind could be terrifying. Not to mention walking up a hill when you're blind. But see, it's that learned helplessness that keeps people in their place without having to do a whole lot of work, because it's a shame-based feeling. So those are kind of my basic thoughts on that learned helplessness.
But there's another piece to that, which I didn't mention, is very important. That is, it's important for people to find other blind people that they can be with. See, that baby elephant maybe the baby as a grown up, if that elephant were in a herd, the behavior would most likely change, and they would come into their own. And when we are with groups, that was one of the great things about the hike. We were there, many of us as blind people, some of whom were sighted people, but by being with other blind people, you begin to understand and incorporate the idea, oh, I can do that. I can try. I can, climb the heights, figuratively speaking. The point is that we have to be encouraged rather than discouraged to try. And we do run the risk that we might bang our knee, but that's how we learn. And there's nothing wrong with that. And then by being able to do more and more, as you said, as Jonathan said, baby steps. We don't, if you're blind and you haven't done much, I wouldn't advise trying to do the marathon in the following week. I would say, get used to finding out what you need, how you're going to do it. And in that way, you then can have the confidence to achieve whatever it is that you want to achieve. And I know the message really is you can do whatever you want to do. You just have to do it differently. And a lot of people gag at that. But it's true. It's just a matter of learning how to do things with what you have rather than focusing on what you don't have.
Well, the key to unlearning that learned helplessness is to try something new and to keep trying something new. Now, there's a limit. I would say that, the definition of insanity is trying to do something over and over again, except expecting a different result. I think there's a little bit of a difference between the learned helplessness and insanity. Not much, but you still want to try.
You see, it's a small
You're still trying. You're still having courage to get out there and do things. It's just, are you trying it in a different way?
Exactly. And sometimes it's helpful to have somebody with you the first time you do it. I mean, the training of a guide dog and its handler is first the instructor. You hold on to the instructor and the dog, and you go walk around. And then the instructor is behind you, giving directions if necessary. And then the third time you do a route, the instructor keeps quiet, and you and the dog are working. But it's that gradual introduction of the location and what it is, because the dog already knows how to do it. What the dog isn't used to is you. So the two of you go together, you get used to each other, and you learn to trust the dog, and then you're off and running. If you want to use a dog, with a cane, same thing. Learn with a cane, figure out what you can do, what the feeling of the cane is when it hits an object, where you hold it, and so forth. And gradually, it just becomes second nature. And that's true in terms of blindness. Things become second nature. Sometimes you don't even think about it. Life is full of risk. It's not the risk that's the problem. It's the degree that you take the risk, how you take the risk, how you manage the risk. Being protective of yourself, but not smothering yourself. And this is what I think is, I've had to learn the hard way. And I've relearned since the pandemic because, like a lot of people, just created my own little cocoon. I didn't have to go out much. But I realized that is not good for me. And that's not good for Aiden. He's bored to tears, and he keeps telling me, Daddy, get off your duff. We're going to go for a walk. And that helped me kind of say, okay, let's go do it. So good walking to everybody. Take that risk. Enjoy. There's a lot of life out there that's there for you to enjoy. Been enjoying talking with you. Enjoy having you, Jonathan, to bounce ideas off of. I look forward to the next episode of Blindside. Take care.